it should be a lot of fun, but got probably about 30, 40 minutes. So if I skip over some stuff, it's just for time. And if I go on and on about other things, it's only because I'm excited about it. So I'm a science fiction author, but I've also written harem, fantasy, post-apocalyptic, and I've done a ton of ghostwriting, so all kinds of genres there as well. But we're going to focus on science fiction this evening. And I guess the first thing I need to do is define what I mean by sci-fi, what sci-fi is, what it's not, what it can be. In its simplest terms, science fiction lives or dies with advanced technology. It doesn't have to have spacecraft, it doesn't have to have aliens, it doesn't have to have genetic manipulation, galactic governments, anything like that, wormholes, space-time fluxes, anything weird like that. If you can take something that we have right now, turn it up another 5 or 6 notches, let's say a computer that you can actually have a conversation with, a laptop, and it still looks like a laptop, and if you drop it, it still breaks, that's sci-fi. Okay, so for people who think it's really difficult writing sci-fi, you can literally take anything we've got, let's say an Elon Musk driving car, and make it have a conversation with you. If anybody remembers Knight Rider, Kit, that's a sci-fi show. It seemed like kind of action adventure, maybe almost a cop show. That was sci-fi. So if anyone's interested in trying their hand at sci-fi, that's really all you have to have is advanced technology. So how I became successful, because there's a lot of authors out there who write science fiction, who never get a contract, who sell very few books, and there's a couple reasons why. And this can go with any genre. The fact is, it's not how well you write that makes you successful. It's how well you market your writing. And you can either do it yourself or you can let somebody else do it. And it just so happens I made friends with a famous, in my circles anyways, author named Jared Handley. I'm very much an introvert. He's very much an extrovert. So he has forced me to talk to people and come out of my cave and do things like this. He didn't force me to do this specifically. I kind of wanted to now that I'm used to it. But we have a podcast called Sci-Fi Shenanigans. You can find us pretty much anywhere. But although the podcast is a fan podcast, we go into writing a little bit. But really what it's for is to make friends with other authors who know publishers that are bigger than us, all the way up to, let's say, Bain Publishing or Chris Kennedy Publishing. By making these friends, he gets to hear, and I get to hear about projects that are coming up or publishers who are looking for specific kinds of stories. And when these things happen, he and I bump our heads together and say, what can we do? Do we have a story? Do we have something that we're working on right now that we can throw in there and turn into something successful? And that's actually how I got into ghostwriting as well. So I'll say that my books were published. Somebody who knows somebody, since I can't tell you who my ghost bosses are because I have non-disclosure agreements with them. But somebody who knows somebody says, hey, I think this guy ghostwrites. And last year, I made a pretty good killing in that I had to pay a lot of taxes at the end because I did that well in ghostwriting. And the third thing a writer needs to be successful in any genre is discipline. You have to write every day. If it's 20 words, you have to write. You have to carve out time. You have to protect it. Build a brick wall around your writing space if you have to. Lock the door and write those words. As it said, hands on keyboard, butt in chair. That's what you have to do to get writing done. The faster you write, the better, but I'll go into that later. But you have to do that. Also, everybody needs to understand that your first draft is going to be bad. Everybody's first draft is bad. Stephen King says his first draft is bad. I'm sure R.A. Salvatore, for those who like fantasy or he's in science fiction now, his is bad. And matter of fact, we're gonna host him on the podcast once he gets back into sci-fi. He's doing a lot of fantasy right now. But in 1973, these two guys, Herbert Simon and William Chase, they did a study of chess masters to try to figure out how long it took them to become masters. And now there's a whole field of psychology built on it. And they determined it was about 10,000 hours is what it took. 10,000 hours of staring at that board and moving pieces around and losing until they got good. Same thing happens with writing. I'm not even sure there's exactly a thing called talent when it comes to writing. I would say it's desire and preparation that make talent, and discipline that makes achievement. If you're interested in writing, you already have something that probably 9% interested. They're living their lives. They're not up for the torture of writing, the self-loathing, the anxiety, and especially the anxiety of hitting that publish button and then praying you don't get any one-star reviews. It's going to happen. You're going to get one-star reviews. But if you've got the desire, you're already way ahead of the competition. The preparation comes with learning the basics of writing. So you have to understand not necessarily what a dangling participle is, if that's what it's even called, because I don't know. I don't care. But you have to understand how to correctly use verbs, how to get rid of your pet words like that. I don't know how many books I've read where that must have appeared, say, in a 90,000 word novel, probably 4,000 times. And most of those could be taken out and maybe left 20 or 30 of them. So it's a little things like that where you practice, you write a whole bunch. That's how you practice. And then you give it to someone who doesn't like you. But that's one of the mistakes I made. So that's going to be a big part of this is what I did wrong. So, actually it's right here. So one of the biggest mistakes I made is once I finished my first book, I'm trying to remember which one that was. I think that was Cloud Development. That one's not published anymore. I've taken that one down because I'll say my writing has improved. But I let family members and friends read the book and then give me their 2 cents on it. That's a terrible mistake. Find someone who is willing to trade books with you. Find another author. They're easy to find on Facebook. You just type in author and then start looking around. Or you go onto Facebook to a group called Listeners of the Dead Robots Society. And that's a whole group of authors. It's everything from nonfiction to fantasy, sci-fi, absolutely anything you can find there. And just ask someone to trade books. And they're not going to steal your book. At least I've never seen it happen before. And be harsh with their book because they're going to be harsh with you. They're not going to be nice. And that's exactly what you need. If they, like for instance, that book, once they realized it wasn't selling, I traded a book with someone and they had it back in a couple of days and they said, you know what your problem is? I don't care about the characters at all. I don't care if anything happens to them. They're not actual real people to me. And so unfortunately, all the praise and all the admiration I got from especially my mom, thank you, Mom, it didn't mean anything because she was just trying to be nice. So don't make that mistake of letting someone who likes you and who cares if you like them, what's called beta read your book. Find someone who doesn't like you or doesn't care. And Listeners of the Dead Robot Society is a really good one. The second mistake I made is I wrote an entire book, probably, I think it was 78,000 words. And it turns out the beginning was the worst part. There's something called a minimum viable product, which is 3,000 words. If you can't hook the reader in the first 3,000 words, they're going to set the book aside. They're not going to care. So my advice to everyone who wants to be a writer of anything, not just sci-fi, is finish the first 3,000 words and then submit that. Plus, it's a whole lot easier to find someone who will read 3,000 words than read 78,000 words. If they're not interested, you can toss those and it's only 3,000 words. I know some people write slowly, maybe 250 words a day. but it's a whole lot less painful to throw away 3,000 words or have to rewrite it based on whatever recommendations and suggestions you get than having to do a whole book, which eventually I'll republish cloud development, but it's definitely not at the top of my list. Another mistake to avoid, and this one is really common, so I love talking about it, is love triangles. Just don't do them. Ever. Not even in romance. Don't do a love triangle. Make it more complicated than that. Do a love quartet or love parallelogram, something. Just not a love triangle. It's too predictable. And readers like me will roll their eyes and put the book away. So unfortunately, if you have a book that has a love triangle, maybe it's time to kill off one of the characters or introduce another one to make it more complex. Another mistake, and this is a big one I made with cloud development, was bad editing. I had the money, I just didn't feel like investing the money. I would rather go play or do something else. But some of my bad reviews were definitely on editing and simple things like using the word not instead of no, because for some reason Microsoft Word didn't pick it up. And I'll tell you, with ghostwriting, probably the biggest lesson I learned, two biggest lessons. Number one, to have a thick skin. These people paid me per word to write. And typically I charge anywhere from 4 to 6 cents a word. So you figure on a 90,000 word book, that's a lot of money. And so what I would do is I would turn in these words turn it in every group of 10,000 words. And the editor would go through it and I'd have to fix it before I could start the next. And these editors were harsh and it was perfect. I mean, so harsh, I thought maybe I shouldn't be writing at all. But instead I took their advice, and most of these editors, even though they were harsh, they would give me examples. They'd send me links. So this is when you use, this word instead of that word. Usually I'd screw it up over and over again, but eventually I'd get it. But working with an editor, especially one that'll give you some really good feedback, is invaluable, because I don't make most of those mistakes anymore, which means I still have to have an editor. But I tell you, the editors, they get stuff back really quick now. Oh, and Grammarly. Grammarly is a really good first edit, and I hope my editors aren't watching this because they think I've improved greatly. Really, I installed Grammarly and I do whatever Grammarly says. So that's a big mistake, and we need to do the readers a favor, especially if you're going to self-publish. There's a lot of books out there, and I've only given a 1-star review to one book because basically I won't say which one it was, but the author fell in love with his thesaurus, choosing the most complicated word he could find, and an editor should have pointed it out. It was supposed to be a book on basic psychology, and it was supposed to be, from what I gathered, it was such a hard read. It's supposed to be written as a narrative. So kind of like a story. If anyone has ever read The Dream Giver, kind of like that. But it was so complicated and so convoluted that it completely lost everybody who wasn't an English major. I've got a degree in computer science, not English, and I like to tell stories, which is why I'm a writer. So working with an editor would have pointed that out and told him to dumb it down so the average person could read it. And I'm sure the book would have done a lot better. Wouldn't have gotten a 1-star review from me. Another mistake, I've made this mistake in a couple books, but luckily the readers have been kind to me. But another book I saw, the first 2 chapters were all backstory. basically, let me tell you everything I know about everything, especially this cool town I invented for this story. Instead of revealing it by showing the reader why the town is cool, it was just paragraph after paragraph of description and backstory and boring, and I couldn't get past it. I even skipped the first chapter, went to the second, realized there's more, and it wasn't worth my time. I didn't even care. I wanted to see what the characters were doing. My advice, even if you're going to write just a one-off novel, romance does this a lot, is tell the reader only about 10% of what you know about your characters, about the backstory, about where they live. And as a matter of fact, I've done a couple ghost writes where I get to book 4, everybody's happy, the editor is done, and now they're building the cover and they want to know what the character looks like. I didn't realize that I had not described the character, what they look like, in any of the books. So I told them that, and there was a little bit of anxiety, but the editor's like, oh, I didn't care. I like the book anyways. So I left it up to the reader, and so I left it up to the cover designer to basically tell me what the character looked like, because it didn't matter. So only tell the reader about 10% of what you know, but that's especially important if you're going to do a series. Most series are trilogies, but then you have ones like Empire of Bones by Terry Mixon. I think he's on book 18 now, and we're still discovering things. So he may have only told us 2% of what he knew about his world in book 1. Or you got the Honor Harrington, which I think is up to book 28 or so in the series, and then he's got three series that branch off of it. If he told you everything you needed to know in book 1, it would be pretty boring not having any discoveries in book 28. And the guy is still making a ton of money. I don't remember his name. I remember the book title, though. Okay, specifically for sci-fi, this is probably the biggest mistake I made in cloud development. Cloud development, I'll give a spoiler because I'll probably change it up a little bit, but I'm going to make it clear what the story's about anyways. It's a weather control book. I specifically wrote it because I hadn't seen one in a long time. I Googled weather control, and it kind of went out of style back in the 60s. So this one's all about weather control. It's about an 11-year-old kid who just happens to be able to figure out puzzles really well. And the corporation his dad works for has been working on weather control for a long time. And unfortunately, I got so wrapped up in the technology and the cool factor and all the amazing things I could possibly do with weather control that I forgot about the characters. And this is why Maxwell, the guy who read my book and gave it to me bluntly, he doesn't care at all about my characters. This is why I forgot stories. When you're writing fiction, stories are about characters. Sci-fi is nothing more than where the characters live. It's a backdrop. If you forget that this is a story about people, or if you're writing really any kind of book, say animals or aliens, I've got a book where it's an alien invasion from an alien's point of view, and it goes horribly wrong. But if you forget that it's about the characters and what happens to them and how they deal with it, the story doesn't matter. All your cool gadgetry doesn't matter. The story is going to fall on his face, just like cloud development did. As a matter of fact, one of the things Maxwell said was that he doesn't even know who the main character is. He thought it was one person, but then I completely switched it in the middle of the story, and then I switched it again at the end. And you can have more than one main character, but it needs to be made clear to the reader, this person is important, and why you should like this person, and why when I put them in danger, you should worry. If anyone has ever watched the show 24, they did an excellent job of putting the main character in harm's way and telling you why that main character matters. All the cool gadgetry and everything the bad guys do after that just complicates the story and puts them in more danger, which is how things should go. In a romance novel, you're turning up the dial, you're starting at 1, you're turning it up slowly, building the relationship closer together, and then you're having something get in the way to keep the main characters apart. But if you don't reveal why they should be together, if you don't make it worth something, then the story doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if they ever end up together or not. So I like romance because it's such a conflict with what I normally write. I have written romance before. It's a ghostwrite, so I can't tell you which one. But it's important to make the characters matter. So don't forget that stories are about characters. They're about either the people or even the robots that act like people, or the bugs, if you can write about bugs. The characters have to come first. All right, the final big mistake I made, I kind of went back and forth if I was going to write science fiction or fantasy. Most of what I've read was fantasy, and mostly R.A. Salvatore, Dragonlance, for those who are familiar with those. But J.R. Handley talked me into writing sci-fi. I should have spent at least a month, maybe 2, cramming as many sci-fi stories, especially contemporary ones, that I could find. That's what I should have done first. So if you're going to write sci-fi, you have to read sci-fi. If you're a romance writer who wants to write romance in a sci-fi world, that's selling. You can absolutely do that. If you're a fantasy writer who wants a sci-fi world but you want dragons, read the Dragon Riders of Pern to see how it's done. If you want mages, like magic and sorcery, read Starship's Mage, because that can be done too. You can pretty much do anything you want. If it has advanced technology, it's sci-fi. But if you don't read what's selling, then you don't know what readers are expecting. If you don't meet their expectations, you're going to get bad reviews. And it's really, really difficult to recover if you drop a bomb and you've advertised it like crazy. If you drop a bad book and you're an independent and you haven't done a ton of advertising, it'll just sink to the bottom of the lake and never be seen again. Like, I'm sure most of you have never heard of cloud development, and if you have and you read it, I'm sorry. I've definitely improved since then, and cloud development version 2 will be better. But that book was mostly me not reading, and a lot of sci-fi in advance to kind of get in that mode. And it was me not remembering that characters are more important than plot. So my final big mistake was definitely not reading enough sci-fi to be able to write sci-fi convincingly and have it be entertaining. All right, next section is how to organize. Most of what I write, especially when it comes to ghostwriting, is at least somewhat organized. Sometimes all I get is a paragraph. Like, for instance, write a story about a guy who goes fishing and the fish is bigger than he thought and he gets drug out to sea. Of course, that's The Old Man of the Sea. I didn't write that one. That was written long before I was born. But that may be all I get. Oh, and guidelines. Like, I want it to be at least 70,000 words and have a tragic ending and no cursing whatsoever. Once I get that, and if that's all I get, I usually submit an outline to make sure that the ghost boss is going to be happy with it. And the most useful way to do that, for those who don't know, is a program called Scrivener. It's spelled Scrivener, and it's definitely my go-to. Another one I use is Archivos, and this is a website, it's archivos.digital, not .com, archivos.digital. And mostly what it's being used for right now is fan sites. So there's a fan page for Lord of the Rings where every single character ever mentioned in any of the books, their relationships to one another, whether or not they're still alive at the end of the book, what they look like, pictures of them, if anyone's ever drawn any pictures or from the movie, is put on there, and fans can go in and add stuff or even their own theories of what should have happened or what Gandalf might have been talking about when he said, "Fly, you fools." But archivos.digital is also useful for authors to keep track of their characters, such as, or like in sci-fi, I know an author, Terry Mixon, who gave one of his ships a certain name and then later on changed the name accidentally because he forgot which ship was which. And maybe if he had used archivos.digital, he would have remembered. But funny thing with that too, the fans were so wrapped up in the story because of the characters, they didn't notice. He didn't notice until 3 books later. But sometimes, like with the Warhammer 40K fans who like to read what's called the Black Library, everything matters, including the color of the uniforms, how tall people are, their language, their body language, everything matters. And I'm not sure how those authors keep track of that, but archivos.digital would be a good way to keep track of that. Other ways of organizing, a lot of authors use note cards, such as my note cards that I brought today, or they'll use individual Word documents, and they'll have one for every character, where every time the character reveals something new, they'll stop, add it to the document, and then go back. And then if they're writing the story later on and they say, oh wait, which character was the one that did this thing, they can actually go look for it and make sure they get it right. Some people use a notebook, which I think is really risky because notebooks are a lot easier to lose. I think even the note cards, because I have a note card holder on my desk. I have one for every story that I've used them on. And they're like $2 for the little plastic box. I've also used a whiteboard. I've got a full-size whiteboard in my office. So it helps me keep track of which stories I'm working on, when I turned in my next 10,000 words for my next ghostwrite, things like that. But even if you're pantsing, or what's called writing into the dark, or writing by the seat of your pants, you've got to keep track of what you've written so far. And sometimes it can be really difficult to go back and remember what you did in a story, especially if you give yourself a few days off, which is probably healthy to do. I don't necessarily do it. I usually write every day, even if it's only a little bit, 500 words. But you've got to keep track, especially if you're going to write a series, because you may be on book 4, but remember, something happened in book 1. I need to reference that. But then you have to go back and literally read all of book 1 again because you've forgotten what you wrote. You know, as authors, we write to get the story out of our head. Our fans read the story to get into their head. So we're going to lose track if we don't stay organized. Being more efficient with your writing is a big deal. The way things are going right now, writing 1 book a year generally isn't going to be enough. Amazon's going to ignore you if you publish on Amazon. The readers are going to forget about you. You need at least 2 books a year. And so, right, I know a lot of people are saying, I can't do it. Well, you can. You just got to change how you do it. My recommendation, get yourself one of these. All right, this is an Olympus digital voice recorder, model number WS852. You don't have to get this one specifically, but this one I know works with Dragon Professional. And you have to use Dragon Professional, not Dragon Home, not Dragon. I suppose you could use Dragon for medical, but it's a lot more expensive. Get Dragon Professional. You can usually find coupons online to get it for about $180. The install is a little rough. It doesn't always install as clean. But what I do is for my first draft, I use this, and I literally turn it on. I've got a microphone that I plug in, well, a lapel mic. I put this in my, actually I put this in here. Don't put these in your pocket, because if you hit that stop button and you've been dictating for 20 minutes, you're not going to know it until you take it out. That's 20 minutes. I have no idea where it stopped, and you have to do it all over again. And 20 minutes is a lot of dictation. You can get a lot of words in. And then it's got this handy dandy little USB. You plug it into your computer and you use Dragon to transcribe it. So Dragon will turn your gibberish into words, and that's your first draft. And then you open up Microsoft Word here with the first draft, Microsoft Word here with your second draft, and you look at it and you type, oh yeah, I was saying this. I have no idea what that says, but I think this will work. Your second draft always turns out better than your first. So this is how I do it. And as a backup, I've got a program on my phone. I have an Android. And so Mac users, Apple users, you're going to have to figure out what you want to use. But on Android, it's called Voice Recorder Pro. You can buy, or you can use the free version, but the full version takes away the annoying advertisements. Plus, it's $2.99. You own it for life. You just log into your Google account and download it again if you get a new phone. So no matter where I am, if I don't bring this with me, I always have my phone. I'll forget to put my shoes on before I forget my phone. So no matter where I am, I've got this app. I can then email that file to myself, take it off my email, give it to Dragon, transcribe it, and I got my words done. It's literally as simple as that. And then once my first draft is done, I do my second draft, and shoot, my second draft, I can sometimes complete 20,000 words in a day of final draft completed, ready for the editor writing. So that's how I do it. When I'm dictating, 10, 12,000 words is not unheard of. I just have to remember to drink water because you're using your mouth a lot, so you dry out really quick. So get yourself some kind of digital voice recorder and Dragon Dictation Pro, and then practice. It's gonna be, most people, when they first start with dictation, it's horrifying because it feels like a gun pointed right at you. It's listening to everything you say. It's totally judging you, and it's gonna make fun of you and tell its dictation friends later how terrible you sound. It's really not. And Dragon's gonna do its best. It's not gonna be perfect. But after you do it a whole bunch, Dragon starts to learn like how you speak and whether or not you pronounce words correctly or whatever. As you practice and as you do it, and especially if you do it in private, close the door. I either close the door, I pace around my desk, and I dictate and I ignore everything else. And then every chapter, I start Dragon on the transcription. But the more you do it, the easier it gets. Like I said, it's going to be terrifying at first. But once you realize you don't have to sit at the computer and you have your feet fall asleep, and you can walk around and you can be that crazy guy who walks down the street and everybody's looking at you because they don't see your lapel mic and you're talking to yourself. That's kind of fun too, especially if you're doing a violent scene. I've done that and I've gotten some funny looks, but I don't care. I'm that eccentric writer that everybody talks about. So get yourself one of these and or use the phone app. I think J.R. Handley is finally using one of these now, but he used the phone app just exclusively for years. But also the battery lasts longer than these as well. Okay, yeah, so Voice Recorder Pro is the name of the app that I use for Android. I know there's some kind of voice recorder, or as I understand, there's some kind of voice recorder built into Apple phones, but I don't know what it's called, so I can't really endorse anything. I don't want to mislead anybody. It's going to have to be trial and error. And okay, I'm going to wrap it up with the 4 rules of writing. Rule number 1, your first draft stinks. It does. You're going to have to do a second draft. And you're going to have to give yourself permission to write a bad first draft. Everybody does. Even me, even Stephen King, even R.A. Salvatore, even W.E.B. Griffin. We all write terrible first drafts. Once you get it in your head and you're able to accept that this first draft is going to be terrible, it kind of builds up a psychological permission to write. It frees you from having to make it perfect on the first draft. Really, your first draft should get the story out of your head and onto the paper so it can be edited or rewritten as a second draft. I always rewrite. It's impossible to edit a blank page. Okay, so your first draft is going to stink. Everybody's does. And your second draft is where you make it look like you did all that awesome stuff on purpose. Rule number 2, being terrible at something is a first step towards being kind of good at something. So that 10,000 hours, it's true. Your first stories are going to be terrible. And maybe your first story will make it big, but there's a really good chance you're going to do what I did and hide your first story and kind of pretend like it never happened. Matter of fact, I think I have 3 stories that I unpublished and will probably never see the light of day again, and that's fine. They were learning experiences, and I figured out what not to do. And rule number 3 is kind of a combination rule, but there are 3 rules to writing a book that everyone will love. Unfortunately, nobody knows what they are. So someone's going to give you a 1-star review. Someone's going to give you a 5-star review, and there's a good chance they're going to be for the same reason. My buddy Jared Handley got a 1-star review, because someone ordered, I think it was hot dogs, and Amazon sent his book. Don't know how it happened, but he got a 1-star review for it. Another 1-star review he got was because he has too much cursing in his book. Well, he mostly writes military sci-fi. If anyone's been in the military, a lot of cursing happens. So it's kind of what military sci-fi readers expect, except this person got their feelings hurt. Another person gave him 3 stars because he used a lot of darn and gosh instead of more cursing. So you got 1 bad review and 1 okay review, because one person said it was too much and one person said it was not enough. What I recommend with your first book is read every review, the good ones, the bad ones, and accept that the first book's probably going to be bad. After that, I recommend reading none of your reviews. Look how many stars it has. If you have 3 stars or better, that's a win. But especially after you've put the time and attention, and especially with the series, someone's going to hate your book. And if you harp on your reviews, if you did like me with my first book, you refresh the page every 10 minutes to see if anyone else has bought it, or if you have any new reviews, you might just give up on writing, because these people can be harsh, absolutely harsh. I had 1 review where the male main character and the female secondary character were in a battle, and she was kicking butt because she's good at it. Well, the guy said that I was a feminist and there's no way this could happen, and he gave me 1-star review, and I laughed it off because I guess he wanted like the damsel in distress, and I didn't give him that. So things like that will happen, and you got to laugh it off. And rule number 4, if you're bored writing your story or writing your scene or writing your chapter, stop, because the reader's going to be bored too. If you're bored writing it, the reader's going to be bored reading it. If you're still having fun, continue on. If your story takes a hard right turn and you weren't expecting it, but you're still having fun, consider allowing the story to kind of write itself. For those who don't write a lot, you may not understand what I'm talking about, but you may have this all outlined and planned out. And as you're writing, your subconscious kind of jumps into your characters, and your characters take over the story, and they do things you don't expect. Yes, you're writing the words, but your characters are really writing their own story. If you're having fun, there's a good chance readers are going to have fun as well. So consider allowing your characters to run the story. Because if you're not bored, somebody else isn't going to be bored too. And that's a good thing. And that's all I got.
Well, thank you so much, Chris. You sure gave a lot of real practical advice for writers. We appreciate your time and being here. We don't have any questions for you, but if any come through via email, I'll send them your way.
Awesome.
And this will be available on the library's YouTube page. We have our own channel. If you just search Prescott Public Library or Prescott Writers, you will find it. And I'll have that up within a week for sure. Let's see, actually, some questions are coming in now. One person asks, how many projects are you currently working on?
I just finished what I actually hope to be my last ghostwrite. I might do one or two more. The last one I did was a lot of fun. So the offer's on the table for me to do at least one more for this current Ghost Boss. But right now I'm finishing up a book that I kind of set aside for about a year. And I want it to be a trilogy. And my co-author, Jerry Handley, just brought I'll say there's a pretty big publisher, I'd say not one of the top 4, maybe number 5, who is interested in one of the stories we've already published, but wants us to split it into 2 books and then add a third to the end. So they want a trilogy. So I'll be starting that this weekend. So at the moment, 1 project, but it'll be probably 2 this weekend and maybe 3 by next weekend.
Oh, yeah, you stay with me.
It's going to be fun.
Okay, so how does your process differ depending on the project?
Really, there's 3 different processes. When it comes to ghostwriting, I do exactly as a Ghost Boss wants, and I stop often and ask questions. Except with this last Ghost Boss, I'll say this person started a book, had about 1,500 words into it, wanted 30,000 words, and beyond some very basic guidelines, wasn't interested, just wanted it done. So I went on my own. I didn't have to submit anything. When it comes to my own projects, I always have a basic general outline, which really is no more than maybe a paragraph. And then I outline 3 chapters ahead, because if my characters take a hard right turn, I don't want to have to outline the next 20 chapters. I can just fix the next 3 with this cool new idea. When it comes to co-writing, that's the toughest part. JR and I work pretty well together. Our writing styles differ and our process differs a little bit. So that's something where we've kind of figured out the best way to do it is for me to do the first draft. And it's usually not just the dictation, because dictation comes out really sloppy. I usually do a quick fix on the dictation and then send it to him. And then I don't want to see it, because a lot of times he'll make changes that I don't like, but the readers do, because it's not my kind of writing style. So I'll do the first draft and I'll just crank it out. It'll be kind of a hot mess, but it gets the story out there. He'll fix it with his second draft, and then he doesn't show me until it's published.
Okay.
So those are the 3 ways.
Thank you. Somebody's asking if you can spell that digital website.
Yep. It's Archivos, ARCHIVOS.digital.
Okay. And so I put that in the chat, as well as the link to your Amazon store. You can just search Chris Winder in Amazon, and then the link to your website that has your podcast.
Cool.
Okay. Somebody else says, what specific techniques do you recommend for writers? I think you covered a lot of that.
That's kind of a big question. My advice generally is going to be write. And if what you're doing doesn't work, change it. And if that doesn't work, change it again. Keep writing the same book until it's done, because a lot of writers don't. They don't actually finish anything. They start, and then there's something shiny attracts their attention. Oh, I could totally do this story. It'd be so much better. And they never actually finish anything. Mm-hmm. But I say develop your own method, and definitely don't co-write until you have your method locked down, because you're going to have to reinvent the wheel again. So whatever works for you, whether it's writing 300 words before work and that's the only time you write because that's when you're the freshest, or writing by the seat of your pants. So putting on some music and just writing whatever pops into your head, or doing a really thorough outline like W.E.B. Griffin does, where everything is outlined and there's no chance of changing anything. I can't write like that, but some people do. So I say try things and don't give up. And once you find something that works, if you think it's dumb, just don't tell anybody, because it's yours and your book's going to get done because you're writing it.
Okay. You touched on this a bit. How often does your outline change over the course of your stories? And was there one which had a painful number of rewrites as you went along?
My outline, I'll say my outline changes less often now. The story I'm writing, the working title is Abomination. It's a futuristic sci-fi, like far future, like 1,000 years from now. I'm doing my second draft because I wasn't second drafting a year ago. And it's pretty much sticking to the same story, but I don't know how this book is going to end yet. I'm figuring that out as I go. So I think the outline is probably going to need to be tweaked every 3 chapters. So I'm only going to outline 3 chapters ahead. But early on, like with cloud development, I think I did a 4th revision and it still came out bad. So do as many revisions as you need, make as many changes as you need, and don't let it discourage you, because in the end, so long as the book gets written and it's done, you'll have done what probably 99% of people never actually do, and that's finish a book.
Okay, thank you. What is your favorite kind of character to write, and are there ways that you try to connect with your character? For example, interviewing your character or something like that.
I don't interview my characters. I've heard a lot of authors do that. They'll actually sit down and write out a conversation with their character, kind of like a psychologist. Tell me about your mother, kind of thing. With my favorite kind of characters to write are the unlikely heroes. So the probably my favorite book of all time is Cartwright's Cavaliers by Mark Wandry and Chris Kennedy. The main character is absolutely unlikely. It's someone you would never expect, and I'll say Mark Wandry caught a lot of attention for writing this kind of character. I'm not going to spoil it for you because it's a fun story. But watching someone who's in over their head and still ends up doing the right thing. Space Team by Barry J. Hutchison is another great one. In fact, that was probably the best. But watching the unlikely hero step up to the plate and win against all odds, that's my absolute favorite kind of character. Mm-hmm. And maybe because I always wanted to be that guy who wins no matter what, and is courageous enough to step up and do that amazing thing. So I kind of live vicariously through my characters.
Yeah. Okay, probably the most important question of all here. Where's the beard?
Oh, yes. I knew that'd come up. It was just time. And Richard Fox, he's another sci-fi author. Whenever he appears anywhere, he's got a tie, he's got a clean shave, he's got a haircut. And I figured I didn't necessarily need to look like that eccentric, you know, writer who lives in a cave somewhere and types in an old typewriter. So I decided to go ahead and clean it up a bit.
Um, and do you typically not know where the ending is going when you begin, or is that unusual for you? You mentioned earlier your.
I only know where the end is going when it's a ghostwrite. When it's my stuff, I rarely know, and that causes me more anxiety than anything else in the entire world, because it feels like it's going to be the never-ending story. I usually also like my current work in progress called Abomination. That's probably going to change. It's the idea of something being awful and terrible, but not really. That is kind of the theme of the story. And usually I discover the ending right about halfway through. So when I get to about 45,000 words, I'm going for 90,000. When I get to about 45,000 words and I drop the final shoe, so to speak, in the story, it's usually then that I pick my ending. And then, honestly, I go back over what I've already written and I retcon it all. For those who don't know what it means, what that means, basically I say A, B, and C happened. Oh, they happened because of this. And I reveal a big secret that it kind of explains it all, even though I just made it up right now. And that's usually how I come up with my endings.
Yeah, that's interesting. Okay. So you talked some about you can be a good writer, but if you're not marketing, you're not going to sell. How can a writer market, especially when they are relying on traditional publishing to do the bulk of the marketing?
Okay, so the by the book marketing says you tell as many people as you can that you exist. However, the big rule, just like these scam callers and scam emails we get, don't go on Facebook and tell everybody to buy your book. That's absolutely the worst thing you can do. Instead, for anyone who watches Twitch, which is mostly just people playing video games, what makes these people successful is when they're playing video games and someone types in there and says, oh, you should totally do this thing. They look over, they see it pop up in chat, and they say, okay, I'll do it. And it's like, this person acknowledged me. I exist. They saw me, and they did this thing because I said this thing. So building a following, like building an author page, not your main page, not where you do all your political stuff and you post pictures of your cat. Okay, that's cute and all, but really, they don't want to see pictures of your cats on your author page. They want to see you, and they want you to interact with them. So even if you have one fan, and that fan gets all of your attention, that fan is going to be so excited, they're going to tell other people, hey, I read this guy's book, and look, I talk with him on Facebook all the time. He wrote this awesome book. And so interacting with your fans is the best way. Don't do book signings. Book signings don't do any good because people aren't generally going to come out and stand in line to get your signature. They'd rather buy your book and then find you somewhere or coordinate on Facebook on how to ship the book to you, get a signature, and you ship it back, which I've done as well. Fans are thrilled when that happens. So build a Facebook author page, tell people about it, put it in your book, facebook.com/whatever for your author page, and then pay attention to it. When someone posts in there, when someone asks you a question, get back to them as quickly as you can.
Okay, thank you, Chris. That's all the questions we have, and it's just about 7 o'clock here. So like I mentioned earlier, if you know anybody that would benefit from hearing Chris's presentation, it'll be on our YouTube page. And thank you all for joining us tonight, and thanks to you, Chris.
Thank you.
Okay,
It's fun.